aroused anticipation that he had not felt since his previous life. It both surprised and electrified him. For half of his 40 years, he had been following the way, cleansing himself of sins, rebuilding his life, erasing the violence in his past. Tonight, however, it had all come rushing back. The hatred he had fought so hard to bury had been summoned. He had been startled how quickly his past had resurfaced, and with it, of course, had come his skills, rusty but serviceable.
Jesus' message is one of peace, of nonviolence, of love.
This was the message Silas had been taught from the beginning, and the message he held in his heart. And yet this was the message the enemies of Christ now threatened to destroy.
Those who threaten God with force will be met with force, immovable and steadfast.
For 2 millennia, Christian soldiers had defended their faith against those who tried to displace it. Tonight, Silas had been called to battle. Drying his wounds, he donned his ankle-length hooded robe. It was plain, made of dark wool, accentuating the whiteness of his skin and hair. Tightening the rope tie around his waist, he raised the hood over his head and allowed his red eyes to admire his reflection in the mirror.
The wheels are in motion.
Chapter 6. Having squeezed beneath the security gate, Robert Langdon now stood just inside the entrance to the Grand Gallery. He was staring into the mouth of a long, deep canyon. On either side of the gallery, stark walls rose 30 feet, evaporating into the darkness above. The reddish glow of the service lighting sifted upward, casting an unnatural smolder across a staggering collection of Da Vinci's, Titian's, and Caravaggios that hung suspended from the ceiling cables. Still lifes, religious scenes, and landscapes joined portraits of nobility and politicians. Although the Grand Gallery housed the Louvre's most famous Italian art, many visitors felt the wing's most stunning offering was actually its famous parquet floor. Laid out in a dazzling geometric design of diagonal oak slats, the floor produced an almost ephemeral optical illusion, a three-dimensional network that gave visitors the sense they were floating through the gallery on a surface that changed with every step. As Langdon's gaze began to trace the inlay, his eyes stopped short on an unexpected object lying on the floor just a few yards to his left, surrounded by police tape. He spun toward Fash.
Is that a Caravaggio on the floor?
Fash nodded without even looking. The painting, Langdon guessed, was worth upward of $2 million, and yet it was lying on the floor like a discarded poster.
What the devil is it doing on the floor?
Fash glowered, clearly unmoved.
This is a crime scene, Mr. Langdon. We have touched nothing. That canvas was pulled from the wall by the curator. It was how he activated the security system.
Langdon looked back at the gate, trying to picture what had happened.
The curator was attacked in his office, fled into the Grand Gallery, and activated the security gate by pulling that painting from the wall. The gate fell immediately, sealing off all access. This is the only door in or out of this gallery.
Langdon felt confused. So the curator actually captured his attacker inside the Grand Gallery? Fash shook his head.
The security gate separated Saunière from his attacker. The killer was locked out there in the hallway and shot Saunière through this gate.
Fash pointed toward an orange tag hanging from one of the bars on the gate under which they had just passed.
The PTS team found flashback residue from a gun. It fired through the bars. Saunière died in here, alone.
Langdon pictured the photograph of Saunière's body and remembered what he'd been told. They said he did that to himself. Langdon looked out at the enormous corridor before them. So where is his body? Fash straightened his cruciform tie clip and began to walk.
As you probably know, the Grand Gallery is quite long.
The exact length, if Langdon recalled correctly, was around 1,500 feet. the length of 3 Washington monuments laid end to end. Equally breathtaking was the corridor's width, which easily could have accommodated side-by-side passenger trains. The center of the hallway was dotted by the occasional statue or colossal porcelain urn, which served as a tasteful divider and kept the flow of traffic moving down one wall and up the other. Fache was silent now, striding briskly up the right side of the corridor with his gaze dead ahead. Langdon felt almost disrespectful to be racing past so many masterpieces without pausing for so much as a glance. Not that I could see anything in this lighting, he thought. The muted crimson lighting unfortunately conjured memories of Langdon's last experience in infrared lighting in the Vatican secret archives. This was tonight's second unsettling parallel with his near death in Rome. He flashed on Vittoria again. She had been absent from his dreams for months. Langdon could not believe Rome had been only a year ago. It felt like decades. Another life. His last correspondence from Vittoria had been in December. A postcard saying she was headed to Java Sea to continue her research in entanglement physics. Something about using satellites to track manta ray migrations. Langdon had never harbored delusions that a woman like Vittoria Vetra could have been happy living with him on a college campus. But their encounter in Rome had unlocked in him a longing he never imagined he could feel. His lifelong affinity for bachelorhood and the simple freedoms it allowed had been shaken somehow, replaced by an unexpected emptiness that seemed to have grown over the past year. They continued walking briskly, yet Langdon still saw no corpse.
Jacques Saunière went this far? Mr. Saunière suffered a bullet wound to his stomach. He died very slowly, perhaps over 15 or 20 minutes. He was obviously a man of great personal strength.
Langdon turned, appalled.
Security took 15 minutes to get here? Of course not. Louvre security responded immediately to the alarm and found the Grand Gallery sealed. Through the gate, they could hear someone moving around at the far end of the corridor, but they could not see who it was. They shouted, but they got no answer. Assuming it could only be a criminal, they followed protocol and called in the judicial police. We took up positions within 15 minutes. When we arrived, we raised the barricade enough to slip underneath, and I sent a dozen armed agents inside. They swept the length of the gallery to corner the intruder. And they found no one inside, except,
he pointed farther down the hall,
him.
Langdon lifted his gaze and followed Fache's outstretched finger. At first he thought Fache was pointing to a large marble statue in the middle of the hallway. As they continued, though, Langdon began to see past the statue. 30 yards down the hall, a single spotlight on a portable pole stand shone down on the floor, creating a stark island of white light in the dark crimson gallery. In the center of the light, like an insect under a microscope, the corpse of the curator lay naked on the parquet floor.
You saw the photograph,
Fache said.
so this should be of no surprise.
Langdon felt a deep chill as they approached the body. Before him was one of the strangest images he had ever seen. The pallid corpse of Jacques Saunière lay on the parquet floor exactly as it appeared in the photograph. As Langdon stood over the body and squinted in the harsh light, he reminded himself to his amazement that Saunière had spent his last minutes of life arranging his own body in this strange fashion. Saunière looked remarkably fit for a man of his years, and all of his musculature was in plain view. He had stripped off every shred of clothing, placed it neatly on the floor, and laid down on his back in the center of the wide corridor, perfectly aligned with the long axis of the room. His arms and legs were sprawled outwards in a wide spread eagle, like those of a child